Okay, final segment and still a lot to cover with our special guest, James Evan Pilato. James, why don't we jump right into it? I know you have a few things still to cover, and I'll let you take it away.
All right, guys. Thanks so much. Yeah, just let me say, I really appreciate you guys having me on. It's nice to be on,
Sure.
other kind of live shows because when I do my own live show, I'm basically one man in the booth, and I'm not in any position to be able to take calls really and have other folks on. I'm already spinning so many plates, and there's
Mhm.
so much content in there. So I do appreciate being on, and I look forward to making it regular. But we were talking
Absolutely.
before the break about just sort of biblical prophecy and end time, sort of eschatology. And that reminded me that I have another more recent site in the media monarchy kingdom called holyhexes.com, where I go over the occult and religion in society and just those kind of areas. So some of the articles that are on there right now about the millions expected for the beatification of John Paul II, the metal books found in Jordan and biblical history, and of course the Jesuit abuse happening at a school and all around here, actually in the Pacific Northwest. I get that story from our own Oregonian here. But I also
Yeah.
have.
You
No,
know
please.
Kevin Annette, by the way?
I'm sorry?
You know Kevin Annette's work?
Not off the top of my head.
You got to check him out. He's the pastor from, I believe, Vancouver. So that's in the Pacific Northwest, who has exposed the Canadian genocide with the Aborigines up there. And
Okay.
there's a lot of connections to the church. And then I don't know if you heard this real quick before I let you move on here, but in regards to the Vatican, there was 160 something million dollar or trillion dollar or whatever it was settlement recently with the Vatican, paying for some of the crimes and cover-ups.
That was the gist of that story about the Jesuit abuse at a Washington school. It became this article was surrounding about this its payoff, and is that probably a pittance compared to the masses of wealth that one of our three main sovereign city states seem to hold, the District of Columbia and Vatican City and the City of London. So the other thing that I want to mention is I guess I'm just trying to maybe tell folks and maybe just kind of promote in a way the sort of umbrella of sites that I have and not to get too bogged down. And cyberspacewar.com is another one of my sites, and that is one that I do actually have another editor that works on, and he's able to post a lot of interesting stories related to some of the kind of the history and hoaxes of UFO sightings and some of the space war angles, and I tend to add in more of the cyber angles of NSA and Facebook and Google and all of those shenanigans. But one of the most recent things posted over on cyberspacewar.com is asking the question, military microwaving media minds. And this is the story that I haven't spent a whole lot of time yet on, but I will probably go into more on my upcoming episode this weekend. But it's all the television hosts suddenly speaking gibberish, and we have all those kind of events, and then we have people passing out in planes and people complaining of headaches they've never had before. And it again makes you wonder, is this related to the radiation? Is it related to the fact that everybody is perhaps pushing down the fears and perhaps well-placed paranoia about everything we see going around, that it's manifesting, we're making ourselves sick perhaps?
Sure. Um, Power of suggestion.
So the one last thing that I do want to mention as some kind of bright note to all of this, as I said, I come from a college radio background. I was the music director at my radio station, and I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of time spinning records on non-commercial radio. I have been for the last year or so putting together and putting out through Media Monarchy what I call mixtapes. And I just published one last Thursday on March 31st, and I basically use my kind of media know-how to put together a mix of music that has transitioned and crossfaded and built it in a multi-tracker, so it's kind of an experience to listen to, and it's somewhat thematic as well. This most recent episode, I've got music from Bill Haley and the Pixies and NXS and Radiohead and all kinds of things. And the undercurrent is basically our nuclear crisis and sort of our weather wars and earth changes and solar flares. Because as I say, it can't be news and politics all the time. And I find, as I've, I guess, alluded to throughout this talk, inspiration and light shed on things through the stories and the art that people tell. And as I think we could all agree on throughout history, our artists have been the most able, for whatever reason, to kind of communicate the things that are going on in the world.
Sure. Everybody talks about JFK being assassinated, but what about some guy named John Lennon?
Exactly. When you think about
Tupac.
Exactly.
Tupac.
But people like that have such a pull over people. So, you could put, any amount of politicians, but one rock star, there's no question. So that's, I think, when, we see people like Tupac or Bob Marley or John Lennon, they don't seem to last very long. And isn't it interesting how short-lived Wyclef's run for the presidency in Haiti was? He started to run and then instantly, in kind of a Ross Perot kind of way, dropped out due to unspecified threats.
Sure, but ironically, the new president there in Haiti that won this spin-off election, from what I understand, is their pop singer, is a crazy, drugged out pop singer from the country. So they had somebody else go in as a puppet, I guess.
I suppose. And again, I haven't looked tons into that story, but that's an interesting angle.
The Haiti situation's interesting, James, because what's really at hand here is, the IMF and the World Bank, they go into Haiti, change the economic policy so that it's no longer lucrative for them to grow their own food, and they make them dependent on the importing food into that country. Rather than growing their own food and exporting a lot of it, they now had all of their food being dependent on whatever was being imported into the country, with higher prices, leading to the food riots that we saw a couple years ago, and them having to eat mud cakes and whatnot. So everybody wants to talk about Haiti and the earthquake, but what about the IMF and the policies for this country here that, in my opinion, they're using as an example for extreme poverty and population control? Because look at the cholera outbreak there. Cholera, where does that come from? You have to ask yourself.
I believe it was reported that it pretty much came from the United Nations troops.
You know what? Now that I think about it, that's exactly right. So there you go. I don't even have to speculate.
And I think it also shows what you were just saying, that yet again, behind the issues of these stories that we talk about, what does it come down to? Food.
Food. That's exact. And water. And, we talk about the oil in the Middle East, in Libya and, Iraq. But there's also an abundance of fresh water in the aquifers in both Iraq and Libya. And sure enough, the Bush family bought property over a large aquifer in Paraguay. So we have to wonder, you can live without oil, James, but you can't live without water, can you?
Nope. And that's, again, unfortunately, on so many levels, those who have, made themselves, by whatever means, rich and powerful are in the positions to be able to go do that. They're like, oh, well, I better get some land that has some water when everything falls apart, and it's kind of no big deal.
Well, and Jesse Ventura uncovered how they're shipping water from the Great Lakes to China now. So,
Wow.
I mean, it's getting weird.
When does it end? All right, James
no.
Evan Pilato, our special guest, first Wednesday of the month. And we're almost out of time here. We got about 30 seconds or so for you to wrap things up. Thanks so much, as always.
Hey, I really appreciate it. So I'd implore folks to check out just the main site, MediaMonarchy.com, and of course there are links there that lead to all the other sites. So I appreciate you guys having me on, and I'd also just like to throw out a mention that Jim Fetzer, I heard him on the college radio station that I mentioned I was the music director of, probably back in 2003, and to hear him go from JFK to 9/11 was one of my really big early kind of
awesome?
aha moments. So thanks to him.
You know what? You're absolutely right. And Jesse
Absolutely.
Ventura actually was on James Fetzer's program talking about from JFK to 9/11. And I think James was actually on Jesse's TV show, Conspiracy Theory, too, if I'm not mistaken.
Interesting.
All right, let's
Well,
get to that next hour and
yeah.
some news at the top of the hour. And James Evan Pilato, thank you so much.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thanks so much. Next Wednesday, we're going to have Jordan Maxwell
Oh,
on the program, so tune in for that.
nice.
Special interview with Jordan Maxwell. We might do 2 hours with him as well. So tune in to the intelhubradio.com. We'll be back. Oracle Broadcasting.